Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Cross Current. My name is Fraser. I'm the senior pastor. If this is your first time here, thanks so much for being a part of what God's doing in our church. Would you take out your church programs that look like these? They should have been handed to you on the way in. If you didn't get one, we'll have some people going around at the moment. You'll need that and perhaps a pen. And if you turn to the center pages, you'll find verses from the Bible, notes to help follow along with this teaching. But before you do that, why don't you turn to let's turn towards the back of the notes, and not on the inside cover, but the second back inside cover, you'll see a little section we call the message schedule. So this is a little teaser. This is like the trailers at the movies, where you get to see what's coming up ahead of time. So we're going to start today a new series on the life of David, the character from the Bible. But just so you can see what's coming ahead, today we're going to start with the most famous story of them all, which is David and the Giant Pickle. Anyone who has kids, you know the VeggieTales stories. So it's quite hard when your kids start believing that the real stories in the Bible are about giant pickles. But anyway, next week we're going to look at the friend formerly known as Prince, which is David's relationship with Jonathan. And then we're going to look at Paraders of the Lost Ark, which is when David takes off all his clothes and dances before the Ark of God. That'll be a fun week. And then the week after, we're looking at You the Man, and how the prophet Nathan comes to confront David when he commits a sin. And the fifth week, oops, I did it again. How to say sorry to God. That's actually a slight break in a way, because we're not in the book of Samuel, but we're going to Psalm 51. And Psalm 51 is a psalm that David wrote after he kind of got caught out doing something wrong, and he repents, he says sorry to God. And we'll look at lessons from there. And last week, the road to recovery, how to survive the worst day of your life. That's going to be a difficult week. It's a difficult message because David and the woman that he had an affair with, Bathsheba, she's pregnant, but the child dies. And we're going to look at what you do to survive the worst days of your life. So all that upcoming, you probably have friends that you think really need to be here and hear some of that. So I do encourage you to be inviting people for this series. Now, on your way in, you were also handed a stone, I believe. That was not for you to evaluate how good this teaching is. Please keep that in your hand. Don't throw it anywhere near me. But I'll explain about that later on. Also, if you're our guest here today, or even if you're regular, you'll see this green card inside your notes. If this is your first time, we'd love to have a record of your visit. Perhaps you'd consider filling that in now. And our regulars fill this in each week with the name and date. And if you have feedback or you want prayer, these cards will come to me and I'll see them first. If you have some needs or you make a decision today or request anything at all, you write those in that card. You'll see drop boxes at the back of the auditorium and on the way out of the building, and you can pop that in there along with any giving that you want to make. So, what a story we have ahead of us. Let's at least set up the scene by reading the first portion of it together. It's going to appear on the screen. 1 Samuel chapter 17, if you want to follow along. And by all means, bring your own Bible each week if you have one, and you can follow with that too. So 1 Samuel 17, let's read a few verses to set the story. It says this: The Philistines now mustered their army for battle and camped between Soko in Judah and Azekah at Ephes Damim. I don't know if that's how you pronounce any of these places, but it's as good a guess as yours. Saul countered. Now Saul is the king of the Israelite people. And it says he countered by gathering his Israelite troops near the valley of Elah. So the Philistines and the Israelites faced each other on opposite hills with the valley between them. Then Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel. He was over 9 feet tall. NBA recruiter's dream. It says he wore a bronze helmet, and his bronze coat of mail weighed 125 pounds. He has armor that weighs 125 pounds. He also wore bronze leg armor. He carried a bronze javelin on his shoulder. The shaft of his spear was as heavy and thick as a weaver's beam, tipped with an iron spearhead that weighed 15 pounds. So imagine like a 15-pound sledgehammer. This is his spear that he throws. It says His armor-bearer walked ahead of him carrying a shield. And Goliath stood and he shouted a taunt across to the Israelites. This is what he said. "Why are you all coming out to fight?" He called, "I am the Philistine champion. But you are only the servants of Saul. Choose one man to come down here and fight me. If he kills me, then we will be your slaves. But if I kill him, you will be our slaves. I defy the armies of Israel today. Send me a man who will fight me." And when Saul, who is the king of Israel and who is a head and shoulders taller than any other man in Israel, when he heard this, it says they were terrified and deeply shaken. Now, the Philistine people were ahead of the game. They were not only a seafaring people, but they were a people who'd entered into the Iron Age before everyone else, before the Israelites. Not only that, but the Philistines had built and fortified 5 major cities. They were in advanced technology. They had weaponry. These were the guys who invented the system whereby you put bronze spears into the spokes of your chariots so that you could ride through crowds of people and mow them down like grass. These 5 cities were ruled by 5 ruthless, vicious kings. Their reputation went well before them. Not only that, but a little bit before this story, the Philistines had already had a battle with the Israelites in which 30,000 Israelites had been killed. So they've already had a fight a little bit before. Israel had been defeated, and here they are standing again on opposite hills with a valley in between, and they've come up with this other alternative, which was not uncommon in the day, which was to say, instead of all our guys fighting all your guys, you send us your best, we'll send our best, and their battle will decide it for all of us. So what's happening is not uncommon. But they have the WWE champion who can put the smackdown on it. He can smell what The Rock is cooking. And who have Israel got? A king who's a foot taller than everyone else, but he's not for fighting. A whole army of people, no one's volunteering. In fact, as we read in the story, this has gone on for 40 days and 40 nights. This giant comes out just teasing them, taunting them, destroying their confidence, and no one will do it. Except, of course, the champion of the story. A little boy. A young man, just a shepherd. A kid who was not even deemed worthy to have been at the battle. Who kind of finds himself there almost by mistake, it seems. And yet he's the one, we'll discover, who's ready to fight. So what odds would you give? What odds would you give a little shepherd boy, young man who looks after sheep, against a 9'6" trained assassin? I think you'd probably still give him better odds than you give yourself against your giants. You see, our giants don't carry swords and shields. Your giant brandishes a different kind of steel. The steel of unemployment, abandonment, sexual abuse, depression. Your giant doesn't parade up and down the hills of Elah. He prances through your office, your bedroom, your classroom. He brings bills you cannot pay, grades you can't make, people you can't please, whiskey you can't resist, pornography you can't refuse, a career you can't escape, a past that you can't shake, a future you can't face. You and I know well the roar of our Goliaths. And while David's Goliath called out for 40 days and 40 nights, our Goliath is the first thought when we wake in the morning and the last worry when we lie in bed at night. You all know your Goliath well. The question is not, do you see him? The question is he all you see? David saw and he heard more than just a giant. And so today I'm going to take us through this, and I want to show you 7 qualities we see in David, 7 qualities of giant killers. You want to be a giant killer? You want to take on this giant in your life? Let's look for 7 practical lessons. If you're using the notes, you're going to want to write these in. Number 1, write this in. Giant killers exercise faithfully. Now, I'm not talking about going to the gym, going on a jog. I'm not talking about lifting weights, not talking about eating healthily. But what we're going to see as this young man enters the story is that we've got more than we bargained for with David. Because while he is a young man and he is a shepherd, he's also a singing, praying, lion-killing, beard-pulling young shepherd boy. Follow with me. We're back in chapter 17, verse 12. It says, Now David was the son of a man named Jesse, an Ephrathite from Bethlehem. You remember someone else from Bethlehem by the name of Jesus? In the land of Judah. Jesse was an old man at the time, and he had 8 sons. Jesse's 3 oldest sons, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shimea, had already joined Saul's army to fight the Philistines. David was the youngest son. David's 3 older brothers stayed with Saul's army, but watch this. But David went back and forth so he could help his father with the sheep in Bethlehem. Here's what I want you to know. Giant killers don't start out as giant killers. Maybe you look at yourself and you think, well, I don't know what you're going to talk about today, but it's not going to be me. I'm no giant killer. I just don't have it in me. Some people have it in them. Some were just born with that fighter spirit, but that's not going to be me. I'll tune out. I'll wait for one of these other weeks. But the truth is, giant killers don't start out as giant killers. David starts out as a boy who goes back and forward to look after sheep. David becomes a giant killer because he's shown years of faithfulness and years of preparation by God. Now, I'm going to be jumping back and forward a little bit in the story. But let's go forward a few verses and see what happens when David shows up at the front line. We're in verse 32. David shows up at the battle. He's going back and forward. And this is what he says. Watch this. Don't worry about this Philistine, David told Saul. I'll fight him. Now, tell me, how does a shepherd boy get to be so courageous? How do you go from being a sheep tender and a delivery boy to being a national hero? From zero to hero. Watch what happens next. Even Saul was quick to point out that things not adding up here, right? He says this, don't be ridiculous, Saul replied. There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy. And he's been a man of war since his youth. Now, can we be fair to Saul for a second? You and I would have had exactly the same reaction. Right? If a teenage paper boy, a shelf stacker, comes to the front lines of battle and boasted of being able to take down the enemy, you'd say the same thing. Ridiculous. But David persisted. We read on. David persisted. He says, I have been taking care of my father's sheep and goats, he said. When a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, what does he do? I run away like a sissy boy. No? Sorry, that was me. That was me. He says, when a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club, and I rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw, and I club it to death. Booyah. It's like, how do you like them credentials? Saul was like, ridiculous. You're just a boy. He's a giant. It's not going to happen. David says, listen. Giant killers exercise faithfully. I've been leading to this. I've been practicing with my slingshot, with my club. I've been taking down lions and bears. I'm ready for the job. I've had the education. You see, his education was out in the fields alone. Think about it. A shepherd, it's a totally thankless job. Sheep don't applaud the shepherd when the shepherd saves their lives. When he grabbed the lamb out the lion's mouth, the lion probably just ran off. Sheep don't know how to stroke the ego of the shepherd, even if he's diligent in his task. And so David, in the lonely places of life, was his schoolroom. The place where God taught him the lessons well. Some of you feel like that's you, that you're isolated, that no one really notices you. You're just out on the fringe. You feel like you're just out in the backside of some desert. And what do I do anyway? It's not that important. I'm just at home raising kids. I'm just working this class. I'm just sitting behind a wheel. It's in those places that God works something in us that can then only be revealed later in time. You see, it's not the great moments of life that make you who you are. Listen, that's not what makes you who you are. What happens is, silently and almost imperceptibly, whether you're awake or asleep, you're either growing as a person or you're growing weaker as a person. And it's only when the crisis comes that it reveals who you are. Are you listening? Amen. It's not just that the event makes you something. You're being made something in the secret places of every single day. But when the crisis comes, then we'll see who you've really become. Watch this. We're going back a little, verse 20. We're going to discover that David only gets to the job because he's on an errand from his father. Verse 20 says, David got up early in the morning. He left the sheep with a helper, took his load and set out as his father had ordered. There's so much in this one verse. It says he got up early in the morning. Exercise faithfully. Those who are getting prepared to be giant killers are being prepared by God. Early. He's early to the job. Notice also it says that he left the sheep with a helper. You know, giant killers know that they must leave their present responsibilities in good hands before they accept the promotion. David was asked by his father to take, as we're going to see, cheese, of all things. He's going to take cheese to the front line. But what did he do first? He made sure he left the sheep in the hands of another shepherd. See, giant killers don't just drop everything to chase an ideal opportunity in the moment. It also speaks to another principle in life, which is that the way you leave something is the way you enter something. How faithful he was to make sure that the sheep that he was leaving were first cared for before he took on his new assignment. Exercise faithfully. Here's the second thing giant killers do, number 2, is they recognize opportunity. It's easy to think that all he's doing is going on an errand. Just an errand. Just a little task that his dad's asked him to do. It's not a big deal. But as you see, this young man sees a whole other opportunity in this job. Let's read from verse 22. It says, David left his things with the keeper of supplies, hurried out to the ranks to greet his brothers. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, came out from the Philistine ranks. Now remember, he's been doing this for 40 days. David's just shown up. He's talking with his brothers, and then he hears the yelling. Then David heard them shout his usual taunt to the army of Israel. And as soon as the Israelite army saw him, they began to run away in fright. "Have you seen the giant?" the men asked. "He comes out each day to defy Israel. And the king has offered a huge reward to anyone who kills him. He will give that man," and watch this, this is the reward. There's a few things. Some you might want, some maybe not. He says he'll give that man one of his daughters for a wife. And the man's entire family will be exempted from paying taxes. David asks the soldiers standing nearby, "What will a man get for killing this Philistine and ending his defiance of Israel?" Who is this pagan Philistine anyway, that he is allowed to defy the armies of the living God? Now, David's father didn't want him to be in the battle for some reason. Right? The brothers are there. David's not there. We don't know why. Is it because David was the youngest? Is it because David has had no formal military training? Is it because David is the smallest? Is this some political game? We don't know. But after 30 days, David's dad says, "Son, we probably ought to check on your brothers. So go to the front line, take them a packed lunch, and then come back and bring a report. Tell me how they're getting on." It's amazing how David's dad did everything to keep David looking lowly. David never even got so much as a donkey to go ride on. It tells us that he had to run to the front line, supplies of cheese in his hand. You know, it's one thing to be out of sight, out of mind, but now to be daddy's little messenger and having to face his brother's ridicule. How many of you know some jobs stink? Literally. If it's cheese. Some jobs just stink. Some things the giant killers eventually do, you'd never know what they previously done. That's why Jesus tells us that those who are faithful in little will be faithful in much. In other words, we are being tested every day by the small things of life, by the small responsibilities, by serving our families, by doing a menial task that no one sees, by doing something our boss asks us to do that we feel is beneath us. We're being tested and tested and tested because God knows that he or she who is faithful in little will be faithful in much. He got a stinking job to just be an errand boy. But it was in that seemingly inconsequential moment that this giant killer recognized an opportunity. And when God moves in your life, it rarely happens by some great neon light in the sky. It rarely happens because an angel visits you in a dream at night or God speaks to you through a bowl of lentils. But God comes to your life in the everyday, ordinary moments of days that just seem like the day that went before and the day that comes next. And you wake up one day and you maybe shave your face or put on your makeup, really both. And you had no idea. You had no idea when you began that day, when you got in your car to go to work, when you got the commuter bus, when you woke your kids from their sleep. You had no idea that on that everyday, ordinary, normal, mundane day was the day that life was going to change. And so Saul is cowering, the armies are cowering, but David recognizes an opportunity. Here's the third thing giant killers do. Giant killers visualize victory. Woo. They visualize victory. They see what can be seen. One writer says, eyes that look are common, but eyes that see are rare. That's why I always define vision. I say, eyes you need to see, but vision you need to see what can't be seen. And giant killers have this uncanny knack of seeing something that others don't see. Again, we read verse 36. He says, I've done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it again to the Philistine, for he has defied the armies of the living God. And that is a word of faith, because he's saying, I have done it, and I can see it in my mind. I can visualize it. I can picture me doing what I've done before. That reminds me of a verse about faith in the New Testament. It's in Hebrews, and it says, faith is the confidence that what we hope for will actually happen. And it gives us assurance about things we cannot see. Faith is the confidence that what we hope for will actually happen, and it gives us assurance about things that we cannot see. Now listen, I'm not talking about positive thinking. Right? You go down the store and buy a bunch of books, self-help books about positive thinking. I'm not talking about positive thinking, but I tell you what, positive thinking is going to do you more good than negative thinking. But faith is not about positive thinking, because faith is only as strong as the thing in which you put it in. And so if your positive thinking is, well, I'm a good guy, so karma, what goes around comes around, and I've been nice to people, so it should come back to me. But faith is strong because it is placed in someone outside of ourselves. Listen, if you look inside yourself, you'll be stressed. If you look at the world for answers, you'll be depressed. But if you look at Jesus Christ, you'll be at rest. Visualizing victory is about perspective. This story in the Bible, if God had it the way he would have it, should be known as David and the dwarf. Why? Because it's about perspective. And if you're Saul or you're the armies of Israel, all you see is a giant, a Goliath issue. And if you see Goliath issues, you'll stay at home and you'll polish your armor. Or if you turn to the other army around you, your friends, your neighbors, your family, and they equally see giants, you'll have a giant problem. And all you'll do is hide in the rocks. Israel's army, David's brothers, King Saul, all listened to Goliath more than they listened to God. They had their ears attuned to fear. They knew how to listen to their enemies. But here's the difference with the giant killer. David heard all the same things they heard. But he saw God where they saw nothing. And it outrages David that what he calls this uncircumcised Philistine was allowed to get away with what he was saying. Notice, of course, Goliath hasn't actually been fighting anyone yet in the 40 days. He hasn't actually killed anyone yet. But the taunt is enough. Isn't that the same for you sometimes? Isn't that voice in your head, that whisper in your ear, that taunt that says you'll never be more than you are, says you'll never take down this giant, you'll never beat this addiction, you'll never mend this relationship, you'll never get out of debt? Isn't the taunt sometimes just enough to keep us from even attempting the battle? We got to visualize victory. And number 4 goes with it. What's this? Number 4, giant killers vocalize confidently. Ooh, the power of the word. Let me read you verse 26. Now, this bit's interesting, I think. It says, David asked the soldier standing nearby, what will a man get for killing the Philistine and ending his defiance of Israel? Now, here's the bit that I'm not too sure about. David's asking, what is the reward? I think he already knows. If you read the preceding verses, he was standing talking to his brothers when he overheard everyone talking about what the reward was. So here's David now vocalizing a question. What's the reward for this fight? And I'll tell you what I think's happening. David is trying to get an audience with the king. You see, you don't just walk up to a king in those days If you walked up to a king in those days and you weren't invited, he could have you killed on the spot. There's even a proverb that many years later David's son Solomon would write, where it says this: don't demand an audience with the king or push for a place among the great. David knew that, but by vocalizing, he got himself an audience. You see that? By putting words to his pictures, he prepared a way for his future. Now, what was it that peeved David about Goliath? I mean, he's really ticked off. Goliath used these words. He said, I'm the champion. Woo! And you are just the army of Saul. But see, David wasn't happy with that, not one bit, because David knew they weren't the army of Saul. They were the army of the living God of Israel. Goliath is suggesting that their God had abandoned them. And for good reason too, because they just give them a good clobber in the battle before. So obviously, with the army cowering behind the rocks and the hills, God must have abandoned you. That's why you're all so afraid. And so David kept on asking the soldiers, what's the reward? What's the reward? And then, do you know what happens next? This is what always happens next. A naysayer comes along. And guess who the naysayer is going to be? His bro. His own brother. Eliab. What's this in verse 28? But when David's oldest brother Eliab heard David talking to the men, he was angry. What are you doing around here anyway? He demanded, what about, now, look at the words here. Does this not just this makes me mad. What's this, big brother? He says, what about those few sheep? That's how I imagine it being said. That's how I would say it to my little brother. What about those few sheep that you're supposed to be taking care of? And then he says this: I know your pride and your deceit. You just want to see the battle. Now listen, friends. This always happens. As soon as you start believing God for something, as soon as you can picture victory over your enemy, as soon as you're getting ready to fight that giant, right, this time I'm going to quit smoking. This year we're going to get out of debt. This year I'm going to get counseling. This year we're going to fix this depression once and for all. As soon as you take one half a step to try and take it on, guaranteed, some Eliab is going to come along and try to put water on your fire. And sadly, it almost always comes from one of your friends or family. And in this case, from an elder. And that's often the case too, is that someone in an elder position takes on someone in a junior position. And you know what it's about? It's about jealousy. It's about jealousy. I've been around here longer than you. You're not going to rise up above me. You're not going to get victory over your issues. I can't get out of my issues. Why should you get out of yours? In fact, it suits me better to have you stay stuck. Do you know that? That's why some of your family are no help to you whatsoever. Because it suits them to have you stuck. Isn't that sad? You've got a few sheep, and you're prideful, and you're deceitful. Well, you know what? I don't see Eliab taking on any giants, do you? I don't see any brothers who are not peeking from behind rocks. And so Eliab probably thought he'd get rid of David, send him back. You know, it's in moments of great victory opportunities that the greatest temptations to listen to those baseless and demoralizing voices will come to us. I mean, Jesus had it. Do you remember the Apostle Peter tried to talk Jesus out of his purpose, and Jesus had to rebuke him? So David responds and he says, look, I've got a good reason to be here. My dad sent me here with cheese. But not only that, have I not got a right to be outraged at the injustices being done here in this camp? And so he speaks his confidence. I want to jump forward a little bit. I'm kind of peeking ahead, but let's go to verse 45. I want to show you how he vocalizes confidently. This is good. David says to the Philistine, you come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. Today, tell me if this is not confident. Today, the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you, and I'll cut off your head. And then I'll give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and wild animals, and the whole world will know there's a God in Israel. I want a little bit of that confidence. No javelins have been thrown yet. No slings have been swung yet. No action's been taken, but here we got a giant killer vocalizing his confidence. See, it's one thing to visualize it in your head. It's another thing to put it out there. I'm sure that's why we're told in the New Testament that if you believe in God with your heart and confess it with your mouth, you shall be saved. There's a power in putting words and vocalization to what you're trying to achieve. Even accountability is important. It's important that when you step out to take on a giant issue this year, that you pull someone alongside you who can be with you and you tell them, friend, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to beat this addiction. Friend, this year I'm trying to be more faithful. Friend, this time I'm trying to stop telling lies. Friend, I'm trying to get fit and lose weight. Friend, I'm trying to get more service in the church. Whatever it is, by putting vocalization to your effort, it brings an extra power. Here's number 5. I better keep moving. Number 5. Giant killers emphasize divinity. I want you to see where David keeps pointing to. Verse 38. A little bit of comedy enters the scene. Then Saul gave David his own armor, a bronze helmet and a coat of mail. David put it on, strapped the sword over it, took a step or two to see what it was like, for he'd never worn such a thing before. I can't go in these, he protested to Saul. I'm not used to them. And so David took them off again. He picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream, and he put them in his shepherd's bag. 5 smooth stones. You know the story. He only actually uses 1. You say, well, was that lacking faith to pick up 5? Or was he just being cautious? Or was he unsure of his aim? Or actually, if you read around the stories, you discover that giant Goliath had 4 big brothers. There were 5 of them. Maybe David was ready for them all. Picks up 5 smooth stones, it tells us, puts them in his bag. Then, armed only with his shepherd's staff and sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistine. David replied to the Philistine, you come to me with sword and spear and javelin, I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. Now, it's interesting that Saul is willing to give David his armor. You know why, right? Because Saul ain't planning on using it. He's like, here, this is going free. I'm not going to use it, so you might as well do it. And David tries it on. It's too big, and he's not used to it. He's never been trained like this before. But you know what else? Saul's armor represented fear. There's a lesson in this, which is that we have to dress in what God has given us, rather than dress uncomfortably in another person's rejected gift. Friend, you cannot fight your giant in someone else's gifting. Even the strategies that worked for your friend may not work for you. You can only fight with the armor that you have, that God has worked in you, that he's given to you. You know, most people, what they say is, well, God, if I need something else. Give me something that I don't have already. Give me more money, more time, more friends, more space, more strength, more courage. In order to beat this giant, I need something I currently don't have. And as long as I'm still here, I can't fight it. But that's not what happens. That's not what happens. David attains nothing new. He fights the giant with what he always had. Moses, when God called him, Moses said, but, I don't speak good. I got a stutter. And what did God say? Let's use what's in your hand. When Gideon came along, he said, I'm too small. God said, let's use what you've already got. When Jeremiah came along, he said, but I'm unworthy. God said, let's use what you've already got. When Isaiah came along, he said, I'm unholy. God said, let's use what you've already got. When Jesus wanted to feed a bunch of people, the disciples said, we've only got a few loaves and a few fishes. Jesus said, let's use what you've already got. When he was at a wedding in Cana and they'd run out of wine, they said, we've not got any wine. Jesus said, I see some pots of water. Let's use what you've already got. Friend, you don't need to wait on something new coming to you so that you can take on your giant of victory this year. God will use what's already in your possession. You know, at first glance, David appeared so weak. When he appears, this is what Goliath says. What? Am I a dog? Do you send a stick? That's a put down right there. He calls him Twiggy. Am I a dog? You send a little twig? Take me on? David's brothers looked, but they couldn't see. Saul looked, but he couldn't see. Israel's armies looked, but they couldn't see. But David looked and he saw. Now here's an observation. Here's an observation. David shows up discussing God. When you read it, the soldiers mention nothing about him. The brothers never spoke about God. But David steps on the scene and he raises the subject of the living God. No one else discusses God at all. But David discusses no one else. You see, really, this isn't just about David versus Goliath. This is about God focus versus giant focus. David sees what others don't, and he refuses to see what others do. All their eyes could see was this hulk of a man in their opposition. They majored in Goliath, but David majors in God. He sees the giant. He just sees God more so. I want to prove it to you. I looked through the whole passage, and in the whole story, I only find 2 occasions where David speaks of Goliath. One statement to Saul in verse 36, one to Goliath in verse 26. That's it. 2 Goliath-related comments. And guess what else? No questions. David does not inquire about Goliath's skill, his age, his social standing. David doesn't ask questions about the weight of his spear, the size of his shield, how many men he'd knocked out before. Never asks any questions. But he gives thought to God. I'm just going to run through this Here are the words of David. The armies of the living God, verse 26. The armies of the living God, verse 36. The Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, verse 45. The Lord will deliver you into my hand, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, verse 46. The Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands, verse 47. I count 9 references. In other words, his God thoughts outnumber his Goliath thoughts 9-2. Now, how does that ratio compare with yours? Do you ponder God's grace 4 times more than your guilt? Is your list of blessings 4 times as long as your list of complaints? Is that mental file of hope that you have 4 times as thick as the mental file of dread? No? Then David's your man. He teaches us this truth, that if you focus on your giants, you'll stumble. If you focus on God, your giants tumble. All his focus is towards who can bring victory. Which leads me to number 6. Giant killers epitomize humility. This is all just so all the words rhyme, by the way. Credit to the other staff in the office for helping me get all these rhymes. Giant killers epitomize humility. I got to be honest, if I had a big victory, I would be pretty tempted to take the glory for myself. It's cool to talk a good game in the lead up to it, but then once you've done it, it's quite nice to bask in the glory a little bit, wouldn't it? Have people pat you in the back and say what a great job you did, and you to kind of act bashful. But really kind of enjoying the glory of victory. But I want you to see where David's continual focus lies. He gives God all the credit, all the honor. And he does it even before the battle. Now, this is going to mess with your head. You see, if you wait till after the battle to give God praise, that's called gratitude. But if you give God praise before it happens, that's called faith. Watch what he says in verse 46. Today, the Lord will conquer you. Did he say, I'm going to conquer you? No. Today the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you. I love that. Yeah. Love that. The Lord will conquer you, and I'll kill you. And I'm going to cut off your head. This is before. And then I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and wild animals, and the whole world will know that I'm awesome. No. Then the whole world will know there is a God in Israel. And everyone assembled here will know that I'm super talented. No. They'll know it's the Lord who rescues people, but not with swords and spears. For this is the Lord's battle, and he will give you to us. Love how David just tells it like it is. Direct challenge. He says, you've defied God. Not just Saul's armies. You defied the living God. And so today, God's going to shut your mouth forever. And then we get to the highlight, verse 48, the bit that we've been waiting for. Verse 48. When the Philistine arose and came and drew near unto David, David ran quickly towards the battle. What? He actually ran towards his giant to meet the Philistine. David put his hand in his bag. He took out a stone and he slung it. It was like a lightsaber. And it flew through the sky. And it struck the Philistine right on the forehead between his eyes. It says he fell on his face to the ground. 9'6". With all his armor, his big spear, his big sword, his armor bearer, and one little stone hits him right between the eyes. It knocks him down. It says, so David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. And he struck the Philistine and killed him. There was no sword in the hand of David. Then David, now, and when you read your kids this story, this is the bit you stop at. Then David ran and he stood over the Philistine and he took his sword, that's Goliath's sword, he took it out of its sheath, and he killed him and cut his head off with it. You might say that David knew how to get ahead of his giant. But when was the last time you did the same? How long since you ran towards your challenge? Giant of divorce, you are not entering this home. Giant of depression, even if it takes me a lifelong battle, you won't take me down. Giant of alcohol, bigotry, child abuse, insecurity, you are going down. Friend, how long since you loaded your sling and took a swing at your giant? Too long? Then David is your model. Because the end of the story is not Goliath's reputation, it's God's glory. And lastly, 7. 7's a good number. Started with 6, but I didn't like 6, so I went for 7. Giant killers energize their community. So what happens next? I thought this was the end of the story. But no. Verse 51. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. And when the men of Israel and Judah rose with a shout, and they pursued the Philistines as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron, so that the wounded Philistines fell on the way from some place as far as Gath and Ekron. And the people of Israel came back from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their camp. And David took the head of the Philistine and he brought it to Jerusalem. And then he put his armor on his tent. You see, the defeat of the giant sucked all the courage out of the opposing army, but it energized David's army, and they went chasing after them, and they beat them down. And because the men had ran so quickly, they left their camp behind, and Israel took possession of all their belongings. You see, friends, faith can be contagious. When we trust God, when we put our confidence in Him, when we see His faithfulness to us, you know what it does? It encourages other people in our family. It encourages other people in our church. Our victories are never just for us. God's provision is never just for you. There is a bigger story being played out. One in which the giant of sin and death and hell is defeated. One in which a servant of God called Jesus comes to once and for all take down the giant of death and of eternity separated from God. Jesus, who comes to slay giants on behalf of the wider crowd. People like you and me hiding back behind rocks because we're too frightened to come out. The hero of the story might be David, but really the hero of all stories is Jesus. Savior of all people. So you have a rock in your hand. Do you have a rock? Pull up your stone, your pebble. Let's have the band come back up. If you didn't get one, we have very strong people carrying buckets of stones. So if you didn't get a stone, get a stone. Let's get a stone. Perhaps you got a Sharpie pen, or someone beside you has a Sharpie pen. So what did I say? We're visualizing victory, vocalizing confidently. Here's what you want to do. This is part of your vocalizing. I want you to consider what giant you want to take on. What giant do you need to take on this year? You have to get out of debt. You have to heal your marriage. You have to overcome an addiction. Whatever your giant is, get your pen and write it on there. And if you're sensitive towards it and you're frightened people will see it, that's okay and that's normal. Come up with a code that you'll understand. Draw a symbol or some icon that you know what it means. As long as you know what it means. You don't have to let people see it. But you get the giant of fear, the giant of insecurity, the giant of abandonment, the giant of your past, the giant of the fear of the future, the giant of the unknown, the giant of raising your kids, the giant of divorce. What is it? Let's write it on our stone as we vocalize before God. This is it this year, God. This is it. This is the smooth stone for the sling. This is what we're going to hurl towards the giant. Not because I'm good or because I'm skilled, but because you have done it all. And those are for you to keep. You don't have to hand it to anyone or give it here. You take it home with you. But I want to call us all together as giant killers this year. Let's get our slings in our hand. Did you notice in the story, David sent on an errand with cheese, but when he went to battle, somehow he already had his sling with him? Did you notice that? He's just bringing cheese, but he already had his sling with him. That's how you go into victory. You're already prepared. You got a stone, you got the sling, you're ready. So friends, let's do it together. Let's hurl our stones. And let's pray. Let's pray. Let's present this to God. Just pray this. You don't have to pray it out loud, but I'll pray and you just echo the words in your heart. Say, dear God, I trust you that you have all that I need to overcome. And so by writing on this stone today, this is a symbol of my faith. This is a symbol of my desire to defeat this particular giant. And so I ask you to help me. Give me strength and courage. Surround me with other people who will believe in me and support me. I thank you that Jesus is the ultimate victor. That even though sometimes we lose little battles along the way, ultimately the war has been won. The giant of death and sin has been defeated. And we have security in him and with him. And that life eternal is our gift. We praise you. We look forward to the rest of the series. We just pray that you bless it, bless your word to us, and bless those who hear it. Pray many more come to join us. And we do this now in Jesus' name. Amen.